Using this armature I will be creating a goblin, because a while back I made another goblin, this one right here. I felt he was a bit lonely, so let's make him a brother. So starting with the armature, I covered it in tinfoil, wrapped more wire around it, and added an arm. For this goblin I used Super Sculpey. The previous one was made with Fimo Professional, and then I block out some basic shapes, starting with his mouth. I then sketch out his eyes and add some balls to make them easier to shape. The pointy nose is added. I then refine the lips a bit more. I add a little worm of clay to shape... Crap! I add a little worm of clay to shape the eyelids. I pick his nose a little to shape some nostrils. The cheekbones needed some more definition, so we add some clay there and smooth it out with smoothing tools. The upper lid is made in pretty much the same way as the lower lid. I really like to add big bulgy eyebrow ridges, and they fit well with goblins and their exaggerated features. The shape of the smile took me way longer to figure out than I care to admit. The ears were shaped and just splatted onto place on the side of the head, then reinforced with some wire which was covered in more Sculpey. I knew he needed a long tongue, so I made a big worm of clay and flattened it a bit and scored in a middle groove. At this point I decided to make him some teeth before touching the tongue. I made the teeth from Fimo Effect Clay, translucent white. My first batch was too small and needle-like, so I made a second set that were much chunkier. The teeth were pressed into place with some Sculpey that was supposed to be the gums, but they ended up not being visible. The teeth also ended up being painted over, so the translucent effect was kind of a waste. I also made a lump of it for his hand to be built on top of later. I needed to bulk up the body a bit more with tinfoil before adding more clay, and I then started sketching out his muscles. If it's not apparent, I think I like sculpting muscles. So these goblins turned out pretty ripped, but they're warriors, so I guess that makes sense. These aren't some low-level goblins, so that and I got carried away when I sculpted both of them. My idea was always have this guy licking some sort of knife. I even considered a sickle at some point. But I went for a roughly made knife. I made it by covering a piece of wire in clay, shaping the basic shape I wanted. Then after breaking it, I carved away a lot of it with an X-Acto knife, and ended up with this. I didn't record any of this for some reason. After baking it once, I add the hair. The hair was made by curling up some tin foil again and putting clay around it, before attaching it to the scalp. I made some strands with clay worms, and made them tear-shaped, then layered them bottom to top on the back of his hair lump. The next step was to carve in some lines into his hair, simulating strands with a clay shaper or color shaper, whatever you want to call it. To smooth out before I baked the details, I brushed over the entire hair with some odorless mineral spirits, to smoothen it out and melt some imperfections. I wanted him to wear a shoulder pad, and I wanted it to be strapped on with some leather straps. I made those by cutting some flat thin pieces of clay and wrapping them around a piece of aluminum wire I bent into a ring shape. Then of course I wrapped those around the goblin's torso. The shoulder pad was cut from another piece of flattened clay. I wanted to have a hammered metal look, so I bashed it all over with a steel ball tool. Then again with a glass ball, which is actually a knob for a drawer or something. It's a tool now. His bracelet was made the same way, but I had to add the detail again after attaching it due to it being smushed. I then primed it black and gave it a quick dry brush with grey just for fun. The skin was base coated with olive green from AK. I added some dark blue sea to darken it. On the previous goblin I used a lot of purples, but on this one I felt like dark blue worked much better. It was also glazed over a lot of areas on its own to make some darker areas. I worked back and forth with these mixes for a while until I wanted some more highlights and add pale sand to the olive green. After giving the tongue a coat of wine red, which is a lovely color, the eyes got a base coat of pale sand to prepare them for the yellow later. At this point I felt like pale sand was the wrong choice to brighten up the skin tone and added some deep yellow instead. At this point I started stippling and glazing. I keep moving back and forth between shading and highlights until I reach a result I'm happy with. The teeth also get some pale sand before I move on to the hair. I went for amethyst blue, which is another lovely color, for the hair. I considered orange or yellow, but it would pull away the attention and would remind me too much of Blanca from Street Fighter. The hair got a wash of black mixed with dark sea blue to bring out the details of the hair a bit more. Then a dry brush on the highlights with amethyst blue and lilac, before some pure lilac was dry brushed on lightly. The leather gets a dark red base coat and metal gets base coated with gunmetal grey. Then a dry brush of silver. To further define the rough metal bumps, I dot in some gunmetal into them and darken them back a little bit extra. And the leather gets some cracked patterns with lighter browns before some glazing with that dark red again in areas. The final detail was to grossen up the teeth with some contrast paint, wet blend the tongue and give the eyes their final look. I used XPS foam to make the base. I made a stencil after the measurements of the previous goblin's base, so it was much faster to make one this time. and it was all glued together. I did the usual coating of black paint and Mod Podge. I didn't record me rolling on the stone texture with tinfoil, but here's an example just in case you want to see that. I used this concrete paint thing to give it a rough look. It's basically a texture paint. And once again some contrast paint and some dry brushing to bring back the detail. The bust was attached to the base with some hot glue and a wooden dowel. I did not like the plain look of the metal, so I decided to try out some blue inks on it. I had a couple of thin down layers and I think it turned out great. And that's the whole process. If you made it through all of this, thank you for watching, and here are some shots of that other goblin as well, and hope to see you on the next one.